At exactly 11:58 p.m. on Christmas Eve, the most powerful man in the city sat alone in a mansion large enough to hold 100 guests, staring at a softening the world beneath a silent white blanket. Inside, every room was warm, every light was glowing, and a table for 12 had been prepared with crystal glasses, silver cutlery, and was only one place setting. One chair pulled out. One lonely man. For 17 years, billionaire CEO Adrian Vale had spent Christmas exactly the same way. Alone. People assumed a man like him could have anything he wanted. Private jets, luxury cars, penthouses and enough money to buy almost anything money could buy. But there was one thing Adrian could never purchase. Someone who genuinely wanted to stay. And this Christmas, something was about to happen that would change his life forever. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can heal wounds money never can, and that everyone's someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. Private corporations in the country. His face appeared on magazine covers. Business analysts studied his decisions. Investors waited for his speeches. Strangers recognized him in airports. Reporters called him brilliant, ruthless, disciplined, and unstoppable. But nobody who used those words spent alone had not been his choice. He had been 26 then, struggling to had died suddenly that year, leaving behind unpaid debts and a broken family. Adrian's mother had already moved across the country after a painful argument between them. Adrian had promised himself that no matter how mattered more than business. But that his sister to call. She never did. He waited until afternoon. Then evening. By midnight, the food on his small kitchen table she was angry and would eventually come back. She didn't. Years passed. Adrian worked harder. The small company became a large company. The large company became an empire. His modest apartment became a penthouse. His old car. But every Christmas, the same empty chair remained. Adrian eventually stopped inviting people. He stopped decorating. He stopped answering Christmas messages. He even stopped saying the word family. The mansion, the most expensive architects in the world. It had 12 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a library, wedding. Yet Adrian used only 4 rooms. The rest remained untouched. Then, 3 years before the Christmas that would change everything, a woman named Maria arrived at the mansion to work as a housekeeper. Maria was 36 years old, modest, when something went wrong. She didn't complain about long hours. She when needed, and left quietly at the end of the day. Adrian barely noticed her during the first few months. That was exactly how Maria preferred it. She knew who he was. Everyone did. But she also noticed something other people ignored. Adrian was lonely. She saw it in without realizing it, then stare at the second cup before throwing it away. He sometimes walked through the dining room He kept an old photograph inside a drawer in his study. Teenage girl. The photograph had been worn around the edges from years of being handled. Maria never asked about the girl. She understood that some wounds became deeper when strangers touched them. One December. The mansion was decorated beautifully. There were Christmas lights along the staircase. Decorated the dining room. Someone had placed expensive ornaments on every table. Maria looked. She soon learned that his assistant had arranged everything because the company board was visiting for a holiday gathering. The party lasted less than 3 hours. There were expensive gifts, laughter, photographs, and carefully rehearsed smiles. Adrian stood in the center of it all. He looked perfect. But Maria noticed his eyes. They were. Adrian walked into the dining room and slowly removed his suit jacket. He stood beside the enormous Christmas table. 20 minutes later, Maria found him sitting alone. He hadn't the food. He was simply staring at the tree. Maria quietly began clearing the plates. Then she noticed something. It was a small wooden angel. Adrian picked it up before Maria could reach it. For the first time, she saw genuine emotion cross his face. He held the ornament in his hand for several seconds. Then he whispered something so quietly that Maria couldn't hear it. She didn't ask. She simply returned to her work. But that night, herself. 5 years earlier, she had lost her husband after a sudden illness. She had been left with a young daughter, Sophia, and very little money. She had worked 3 jobs at one point just to keep food on the table. She knew what it felt like to wake up in a quiet say good morning, would never say it again. She knew what Christmas felt like when there wasn't enough money for gifts. She knew the strange pain of watching other families laugh through. But Maria had. Loneliness did not always mean being physically alone. Sometimes loneliness meant believing nobody would care if you disappeared. And Adrian, she realized, had been living inside. Noticed a large envelope on. But the name on the corner caught her attention. Emily Vale. Maria froze. The name meant nothing to her at first. Then she remembered the photograph. The girl. Adrian's sister. Maria looked away immediately. She continued cleaning. But later. His voice minute. When he ended it, he stood completely still. Maria saw him wipe his eyes before quickly walking away. That evening, she learned the truth by accident. Emily had been found after years of struggling with a serious illness. Adrian had. But Adrian refused. Not convincing himself that he had been abandoned. If he saw his sister again, he would have to confront everything he had buried. The anger. The guilt. The regret. The years he had wasted. And the possibility that maybe the person he had studied. Maria passed. He looked less like a billionaire and more like the frightened young man inside the picture. For a moment, Maria considered walking away. It wasn't her business. She was an employee. He was her employer. There were boundaries she should never cross. But then she remembered something her husband used to tell her. Sometimes people don't need advice. They just. The next morning. She was going to make Adrian an offer. Not a business offer. Not a request for money. Not a favor. Something. On Christmas Eve, Maria arrived at the mansion surrounded by documents. She prepared a small meal in the kitchen. Nothing luxurious. No expensive ingredients. Just roasted chicken, potatoes, vegetables, bread, and a simple dessert. She had never done before. She placed 2 plates. 2 glasses. 2 chairs. Adrian eventually walked into the room. He stopped. His eyes moved from the food to the table. Then to Maria. She stood quietly at the end of the room. He looked confused. Maria took a breath. She knew moments small home and have dinner with her and her daughter. There would be no business talk. No employees. No investors. No cameras. No expensive gifts. Just food. A small tree. And people who would be happy to see him. Adrian stared at her. He seemed almost offended at first. Then confused. Then deeply moved. Nobody had something from him. Maria wasn't. She wasn't even asking him to be generous. She was simply offering him a seat at her table. Adrian eventually asked why. Maria gave him the only answer she could. Because nobody should have to eat Christmas dinner alone. The words hit. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Adrian quietly thanked her. He didn't accept. Not yet. But something inside him had changed. That night, Adrian couldn't sleep. He walked past the unopened presents, past the rooms that had never heard children's laughter. And finally, he stopped outside his study. He opened the LD photograph. For the first time in 17 years, he turned it over. On the back was a handwritten message. It was from Emily. It said that no matter what happened, she would always consider him her brother. Adrian sat down and cried. Not the quiet tears, single tear he wiped away before meetings. He cried like been allowed to put it down. The following morning, Adrian did something he had never done on Christmas. He cancelled everything. He told his Emily was awake when he entered her room. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other. 17. There was no dramatic speech. No perfect apology. Just two siblings who had spent too much of their lives believing they were better off without each other. Adrian sat. They talked for hours. They discovered misunderstandings. Neither had stopped loving the other. They had simply been too proud and too hurt to admit it. Emily had tried to contact him many times. Adrian had deleted the messages. Adrian had. Both had spent years believing the other had chosen to. The real left the hospital that evening. He stood outside beneath falling snow. For the first time, Christmas didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a second chance. Then he neighborhood. There were no marble floors. No giant gates. No security guards. Just a small porch, warm lights, and a simple Christmas wreath on the door. Maria opened it. Behind her stood Sophia, handmade ornament. Adrian hesitated. He suddenly felt uncomfortable. Not because his world was from theirs. Maria smiled and invited him inside. The house smelled like roasted food and cinnamon. There was a small Christmas tree in the corner. Under it were. She knew he was her mother's employer. But she didn't treat him like a billionaire. She simply asked whether he liked Christmas cookies. Adrian smiled. It was perhaps the scene on his face. He said yes. Sophia handed him a plate. He took one. It was slightly burnt. He ate it anyway. Then he laughed. A real laugh. The kind that sounded unfamiliar even to him. Dinner was simple. There was no crystal. No orchestra. No expensive wine. Just 3 people school. Maria complained jokingly about the burnt cookies. Adrian listened. And for the first time in years, he didn't check his phone. He didn't think about stock prices. He didn't think about acquisitions. He didn't think about. He simply sat there. Present. Alive. Human. After dinner. It was a little. She told him she made it herself. Adrian held it carefully. Then he looked at the small Christmas tree. He understood something. His mansion had first. Before leaving, Adrian thanked Maria. But she stopped him. She told him that if he truly wanted to thank her, he. Not just this Christmas. Every Christmas. She told him to call his sister. Visit her. Build something that money could never buy. A family. Adrian promised. The following year. Celebrities. He didn't invite investors. He invited employees who had nowhere to go. Single parents. Widows. Workers who couldn't. Cleaning staff. People who spent the holidays alone. Maria came with Sophia. Emily came too. Adrian stood at the entrance and watched people fill. Children ran through the halls. People laughed. Music played. The dining table. And for the first time, every chair was occupied. Adrian looked across the room and saw Maria standing beside the Christmas tree. She smiled. He smiled back. That night, Adrian made another decision. He created a facing financial hardship during the holidays. But he insisted that the foundation never carry his name. When journalists asked why, he had finally learned that kindness wasn't a transaction. It wasn't something you did so people could. It felt like when nobody did it for you. Years later, Adrian would still remember the Christmas when Maria made him that unexpected offer. People often assumed his greatest achievement was building a billion-dollar company. He disagreed. His greatest achievement was a bigger mansion. He had needed an open door. He had never needed more money. He had needed someone to sit at his table. He had never needed another business victory. He had needed forgiveness. And sometimes, the person who changes your life isn't the person with power. Sometimes it's the person you barely notice. Who brings your coffee? The person who quietly notices that you're hurting when. Maria didn't save Adrian with money. She saved him with kindness. And Adrian, wealth in the world isn't what you can own. It's who is willing to sit beside you when everything away. Take a moment to like the video, share it with someone that they matter, and one kind message can sometimes reach a person at exactly the moment they need it most. And before we end, I have a special request for you. Comment, "No one should be alone," below if you believe tonight, their window, smiling for the world while quietly wishing someone would knock on the door. And maybe the greatest Christmas gift you can give them isn't. I see you. You matter. You don't have to be alone. That Christmas, the billionaire finally learned something no business school had ever taught him. A house becomes a table becomes a celebration when people are willing to sit together. And a lonely heart can begin healing from the smallest unexpected offer. Sometimes, kindness doesn't knock loudly. Sometimes, it simply stands at the door. And waits for you to let it in.